I want to bring in MS Now contributors Jake Sherman and is co-founder of Punchbowl News. Sam Stein is managing editor of The Bulwark. Also with us, Mark McKinnon, former advisor to President George W. Bush and Senator John McCain, as well as creator of The Circus. It's good to have you all here. Sam, do you see all of these things Trump is doing to try to preserve Republican power as real? When he doesn't do the one thing that would seem to be the most obvious, respond to Americans' concerns about the economy?
I think Trump operates with a lot of id. Like, what's on his mind is what you're going to get on his social feed. If he sees something on TV, he'll probably post about it. If someone hands him some AI-generated slop that he thinks is funny, he'll probably post about that too. It's not much like a three-dimensional chess here. And if we've observed anything in these past 10 years with Donald Trump in our lives, it's that it's really hard to keep him on script, right? Like, you can actually script out a speech for him, but he will deviate in a number of disjointed directions, and then he'll call it a weave. And so, yes, he knows very much that he needs to focus on getting the costs down in this country. He knows very much that consumer sentiment is in the pits. I'm assuming he knows that a lot of this is tied to his tariffs and to the Iran war. But one thing he can't do is stay unscripted. Another thing he can't do is admit fault. And to say that people are suffering would be to admit fault, and he's not going to do that.
So, Mark, I want to use just one example from Trump's social media spree over the weekend. He's now talking about headlining a rally during the Great American State Fair after that wave of artists dropped out of the planned concert series. Quote, "I am thinking about bringing the #1 attraction anywhere in the world, the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and he does so without a guitar, the man who loves our country more than anyone else, the man who some say is the greatest president in history, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump, to take the place of these highly paid third-rate artists and give a major speech." What's your sense of why Trump posts something like that when Americans are focused on the war, on the economy? I'm going to give you two of the things I hear most from his detractors. One, it's a sign of mental decline, or as one op-ed suggested today, escalating narcissism. What do you see?
Well, Chris, I think what's happening here mostly is that he's now more concerned about his legacy than he is about the midterms or politics. So everything he's doing, from the ballroom to the arch to his face it's all about him and his legacy, and also grifting as much as possible for him and his family. Let me tell a quick story about the musicians in the 250th. My job for the 2004 conventions was to get the music. I was a bad songwriter back in the old days in Nashville. That's why I switched to politics. But it was the most miserable job in the world, because everybody's, at a convention, they're like, get Beyonce, get Bono, get the Rolling Stones. And of course, I'd make 1,000 calls. And after 2 months of making 1,000 calls, I had the Oak Ridge Boys, Wayne Newton, and Lee Greenwood. So I know that's what happened here. That Republicans can't get musical talent. And so Trump is now stepping in to make it all about him, of course.
So, Jake, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum was asked about Trump taking over this part of the 250th as headliners. Here's what he said.
He said that he is going to now have a Make America Great Again rally that he hosts. Is that going to be a standard political rally?
Well, I think President Trump it's important that whoever would be president of the country at the 200th, the 150th, the 100th, the 250th, the president plays a key figure in helping to, again, celebrate, kick off, and be at the opening of these events. These events, again, across the country celebrating America. And it's just, it's almost confusing to me why it's somehow that people want to turn this into outrage as opposed to turn it into celebration.
Is it a celebration? Are you sensing celebration when you look at the rundown, or when you see maybe what's happening on the ground where you are in D.C.?
This isn't really complicated, Chris. He couldn't get artists, so he's going to speak, and that's what Burgum is effectively saying. You mentioned earlier, Chris, about the implications of what will happen if he loses the majority. And I get the sense from my conversations with a lot of people in the administration around Trump and on Capitol Hill that the realization hasn't really fully settled in that if they don't keep the majority, his presidency is effectively over, barring some massive course change in which he starts doing deals with Democrats, which I see as very unlikely. So I actually don't know if he is really I think he's attuned to the fact that costs are high. I don't think he's really attuned to what he needs to do to lower them, because he just keeps talking about things, whether it's the weaponization fund, the ballroom, the America 250 thing, which is obviously important, but not really a focal point of getting people's costs down. He keeps talking about these things more than he talks about anything else. And I just don't see a world in which that matters to any single Republican trying to win re-election.
It's worth remembering, Sam, that at one time Donald Trump's postings and what he had to say did seem to have an impact. Certainly, he got elected twice, right? So either people liked what he said or thought if they didn't like it, it was not the most important thing. Do you get a sense now he's just posting to and for his base? What do you see with all of this?
Again, I just think he's reactive. So let's just take this this incident with the 250th celebration, the musical acts, right? Like, he sees what's happening and how embarrassing it is. He, when Milli Vanilli is like, no, we don't want this.
Do you think he's embarrassed?
Yes. When Milli Vanilli, which is not a real group, they were a fake group that had backup singers singing, okay? When they're like, no, this is too much, we don't want this. Yeah, that's embarrassing. And so he's going to react to that. He's going to divert. He's going to plan his own speech. He's going to lash out at the entertainers. He watches and consumes copious amounts of news coverage. We know this. We know he watches a lot of TV. We know that he's being fed social media posts. And I just think this is someone who, he's approaching 80 years old. He doesn't really care about whether he's acting in a presidential manner. And he's just going to lash out when he wants to lash out. You kind of see this type of behavior in your old uncle who is acting a little bit crazy and probably watches Fox News a little bit too much. But in this case, this man happens to be the president.
Mark, there's a really interesting Newsweek analysis of state-level polling. It shows Trump has lost ground in every single state since taking office. And the drop has been really stark in some red states. In Florida and Ohio, his numbers have gone from positive to negative. He lost 23 points in Kentucky. In Wyoming, the most pro-Trump state in America, he's gone down 25 points. So looking at that, is it simply too late to try to convince Americans you can improve their economic situation, no matter what he does or says?
Well, Chris, the first thing you've got to do as president, which Bill Clinton did probably better than anybody, is to acknowledge that people are having economic pain. I mean, Clinton say, I feel your pain. Trump doesn't feel their pain. He doesn't. Not only doesn't feel, he doesn't think there is any pain. But I can tell you from having done political communications for several decades, I could spin a lot of stuff, but you can't spin people out of whatever they're feeling economically. You can't just hit them with statistics and say, no, you're wrong. You're not feeling bad. No, gas prices are not up. No, grocery store prices are not up. That's just something that people feel in their gut. They know they're paying their bills and they just can't be talked out of it. So you've got to just start by acknowledging it. And then secondly, you've got to convince them that you're doing something about it.
So I'm wondering then, Jake, if you look at the range of things that he has done, the push for gerrymandering to change some of the voting laws, has he come to the conclusion that the only way to win is to change the rules?
I don't know if it certainly seems his actions would seem to indicate that, yes, he thinks that he has a better chance of winning if he has more Republican seats. But let's be real here. Only twice in the last nearly 100 years has the president's party held the House in a midterm. I mean, it was 1998 during Clinton's impeachment and 2002 after 9/11. So whoever is in office has to provide, the political climate has to be so overwhelmingly good for them in order to defy this historical trend. I mean, I didn't make this up. This is the fact. So unless you believe something that Donald Trump is doing and Republicans are doing is so overwhelmingly positive for the country, everything is going so well well that we're going to buck 100 years of 50 elections, 100 years of trends, then I think the obvious answer is probably the right answer, that they're not going to win and they are trying to pad their majorities. I think that much is obvious. But by the way, it hasn't gone that well. South Carolina rebuffed him. Georgia rebuffed him. So it's not been a slam dunk, although it has been helpful for them.
Well, Sam, that brings me back to something else Frank Bruni wrote about, which is how skeptical Trump is of polls. I mean, he won in 2016 when at the start his candidacy was treated as a joke. He defied polls, beating Hillary Clinton. But if he thinks, as Frank points out, that maybe the Iran war isn't an albatross but an ascot, those are Frank's words, would that just be delusional?
To a degree, yeah. I don't know how much the Iran war itself is on the minds of voters who tend not to vote on matters of foreign policy. I do think it's very evident that the oil shock and the rise of gas prices and all the effects that that's had throughout our economy, from everything for the price of food, for instance, that definitely has an impact. And to sit there and say, well, this is momentary, or it's the price to pay to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, or in Trump's case saying it's not actually that bad. In fact, things are going great and it could have been much worse. That is the type of sort of detachment from reality that can get you in real trouble, right? Like, as Mark was saying, if you are just not even, nodding to the economic fears and pain that people are, feeling in their lives, then you come across looking not just insensitive, but totally detached. And so I think that's the real danger Trump has with the Iran war.